Hey, I'm Todd. Thanks for choosing to watch my video, and if you would subscribe it, like it, all that stuff, that'd be great. Otherwise, enjoy the video, and I hope it gives you the information you need and is helpful to you. Take care. So I do get a lot of comments with people saying I have saved them a lot of money, and I do get questions, hey, can I send you some money somehow? And now there is a way, if you so choose, called fan funding. You'll find it on the channel page right there. Alright, 2006 GMC Envoy, probably a Chevy Blazer as well. 4.2 liter engine, 2006, and a few model years older than that. My camera died, so I'm right in the middle of it. So I've got the thermostat housing assembly up here. Don't forget about making sure you have the gasket that was stuck to the engine block. Got this clamp off with a pair of pliers, and now we can just work this hose off here. Maybe jam a screwdriver or a pick in here and separate the hose from the assembly. I get a whole assembly right here, so we'll be taking the hose off and replacing the whole assembly, but this is kind of the end on removing. We'll take the hose off the assembly, just kind of pull it up here, give us good access through this big hole we made. Loosened up, make sure you take your belt off all the way, because if you get coolant on it, there's a good chance it'll be making noise and squealing, so take it off. We'll get coolant coming out of here when we pull this off. Let's see if I just pull it off with one hand here. Yeah. Worked it free with the screwdriver around the edges. Now we'll get it off. Boom. More coolant going out into my bucket. So, removing thermostat assembly. I've squeezed this pliers and clamp far enough that it's on its own, it's catching. And then to release it, really you just put a screwdriver in through this way, through that hole, and then you push down on that tab that's sticking up, and it should release it and put it in, and it'll lock in place then to release the spring tension. So you can give that a shot if you want. I don't do it very often, but I thought I'd show you. So there's the thermostat mounting area. You can wipe it down with a rag, maybe use a little emery cloth, clean up some of that seal debris on there, just make sure it's fairly smooth, and we can reinstall it, the thermostat assembly. Actually snap the clamp back on the hose. I want to try and make sure my bolt holes are kind of lined up, so that's what I've done. I just kind of put it down there, made sure the hose and the thermostat assembly are kind of in the right spot. I was going to mention before, you can maybe mark it when you took it off, because at least this is still an original hose. It's got a line on it. You can make a mark on it. I guess you put a new one on. So we got our holes lined up, so we'll pull this back up and we'll snap the hose. So we got this lined up, so we'll put the hose clamp back on there, and we'll snap it in place and make sure it falls back on the old markings on your hose. I don't have my tripod or anything, so I got to do this all, hold the camera and all that. But here we go. I got my everything's kind of lined up here with the hose and the clamp. It's my screwdriver in there. So once I'm holding the hose assembly with one hand, I can pull this screwdriver. I pull the screwdriver this way and push down on that tab, and it should release it and set it in place. So I think if you look at it, you can figure it out, but that's what I'm going to do next, is snap that clamp into place and just double check that it, make sure it sits in the old grooves to help prevent leaks. Got both bolts started. Make sure you start them by hand. Put the top one in first and screwed it in quite far, but not tight. And then I was able to pivot this as needed, and with my two fingers I was able to get the bolt in the hole down there without dropping it. Of course, you might drop it. The other option is to go through the wheel well, because if you have like a 2 or 3 foot extension, you can get it from below. You can probably, I don't know if you can see it on the camera there, but it's down there and it's a pretty straight shot. So that's another option, but you can get it. I have confidence in you. You can use a little piece of paper or a little plastic and stick it in your socket, and that way the bolt won't fall out. That's what a little tip there. So we got our bolts started, and then we'll tighten them up. I'm going to guess about 96 to 105 inch-pounds if you're using a torque wrench. So just tighten them up. You can get it pretty easy with just a 1/4 inch ratchet like that, pretty snug, and then maybe an extension or a swivel. And down here, a little awkward, but you should be able to get it that way. Again, or through the wheel well with a long extension, and that's how you get to them. We got our thermostat housing bolted in place. We're going to drop our alternator back in place. So we got the little free play here. Get that out of there. Got this tweaked out of the way a little bit. Just give us some space to drop the alternator in place down here. And that lower bolt never did come out of the alternator. It probably stays in place. And that's the way it's going to work for me. It'll probably work that way for you. So you I probably wouldn't take that bolt out. And we did slightly tweak this hose a little bit this way. This is does have a little free ability to bend a little bit. Of course, you're at your own risk. I don't want to be responsible for you breaking off AC lines, of course. But it is a tight fit between this bolt hole, alternator, and this hose. So be aware of that. Not fun. So drop the alternator in, and then get your 10mm bolt hooked up, 10mm nut for the AC battery. We'll get the battery positive hooked up, 10mm nut on here. Plug this back in. We've got our battery negative disconnected to take the alternator out, 8mm or 5/16 on that. Take it off, hold it out of the way. All bolts are left to loosen, right to tighten. So we'll drop the alternator in, kind of get it in place, and go from there. Here's the position for removing or installing that battery positive there, 10mm nut. So we'll just put this cover back on because I'm putting it back together, but you can pop that off to remove that nut. Then we got our battery connector here for the alternator. Actually, not the battery connection, but for the field, for the light and all that good stuff. So we've got our alternators back in place. And we can kind of be tricky with that bolt. Then back here, so we're going to finagle this back in place. So we got that bolt down there. So we'll kind of line things up, maybe start a bolt up here and work that bottom bolt in. But it's very important here that you start all bolts by hand and feel good about them being turned in 5, 6, 7 turns by hand, because the last thing you want to do is cross thread anything at this point by forcing it in with a wrench. So cautious of that. So we're taking bolts in, putting bolts. So you're taking bolts out or putting bolts in. I used a 15mm ratchet wrench for getting it out. I'll probably use that to get it in too. And a 15mm wrench right there as well was what I used for the bottom bolts. And I used 3/8 ratchet and extensions, swivels, 15mm swivel to get the bolts out of the top of the alternator. Those two bolts right there, just a swivel, extension, so not too bad at all. So we got the bolts started down there, and all fingers started. Now they're all tight. And note of warning, because I got bit by it, when you're putting the wire on the back for the battery positive with the 10mm nut. Oh, you really can't see too much at all in there. However, if you have it angled down too far, it's going to interfere with the thermostat housing assembly and lower hose that you just put on. Because I was having difficulty getting the alternator to push up against the engine. It's because the battery positive wire was actually just kind of stuck on the lower hose and pipe. So make sure the alternator wire's up high enough so it doesn't interfere with the pipe So kind of note of where you take it off and put it back on in the same angle and you should be fine, but I got bit. And I had to reach down through here with a 1/4-inch ratchet and 10mm and loosen it up a little bit, so I'll have to go back in here and tighten it up. But boom, alternator's back on. And put the bracket back on here. 15mm bolts, 15mm bolt, 10mm bolt for that bracket. Kind of like this. $15mm bolts. Remove or install as needed, depending on where you're at. And it's got this little plug here, snap back in place or take out of the bracket as well. So next step, remove or replace, whichever you're going, installing 15mm bolts here, and then a 15mm bolt in the back as you saw, and I just have a swivel and extension. I'm putting that back on. Then there's the hole for that little pin and the bracket. We can bend that back. Just a little aluminum bracketry. We can bend that back and put the 10mm bolt right in here. 10mm bolt. Right there. That'll probably bring us back to installing the belt. And we'll show you how to take that off and put it on next. So I got my 3/8 ratchet in a square hole in the tensioner. And you just have to push down like this. You getting that? It's for removing and reinstalling the belt. So, sorry about that. So I'm going to take it off and put it on over here at the alternator.
10% of $100 is a lot more than 10%.
So I'm just going to be pushing down like I just described and putting the belt back on. Make sure it's in all the grooves properly before you start it up. That's taking off and putting on the belt. We're out of bolts except for maybe putting the battery back on. So put this on here, start it by hand of course, and we'll snug it up with a 8mm 5/16 wrench. Then we can take the radiator cap off, which I've done. It's a screw type, so just screw it off, and then we can put a nice 50-50 mix of coolant. Depends what came out. This will take Dex Cool original equipment, or if it has green in it, put green in it. But we have Dex Cool in here, so we'll probably put about a gallon of Dex Cool in it, and then add about a gallon of water. Try and do a 50-50 mix. If you want to pre-mix it, you can. You can certainly buy it that way. But just pour it in here till it's full. We let it set a little bit in case there's any coolant settling that needs to be done, air pockets and stuff. So fill it up to the top here. Let it set a few minutes. If it doesn't bubble down, then put the cap on, and then we'll run it for a few minutes. The bottle says Dex Cool right on it. Again, depends on what color came out when you undid it. There's a full cold line, so you can top it off as needed here. Right in there. Top it off once you've gone for your test drive, you should do, and make sure it's full, and then make sure it's cooled off, and then you can double check the full cold line when it's cooled off after a few hours. It seems like I only got about a half a gallon in this thing. I don't quite believe that. I think it's going to need more than that, but that's what it got in, and the radiator's not going down. It still looks full, so at least start it up and run it. Let's put our temperature on hot in our face here so we can feel the heat. Turn up the blower motor a little bit, and then we'll wait. I'd say in about 5 minutes we should start feeling some warmth, and we can always watch our temperature gauge as well. So we'll be back after just a few minutes and we'll see if we get heat here. Alright, it has been just about 3 or 4 minutes. I am starting to feel a little heat. I guess it depends on what the temperature is outside and how hot it was when you started the job. Also can rev up the engine, speed things along a little bit. So we're starting to get some heat in here, so I feel good about continuing to run it. If after, say, 5 to 10 minutes you don't get any heat, and your temperature gauge isn't crazy, go ahead and shut it off, and I would let it sit for about 15-20 minutes maybe, a little while, then open up the cap and see if you can top it off and maybe some of the fluid's gone down. So, assuming everything's good, getting heat, go for a test drive, 7 or 8 miles. Or I suppose the other option is to run it at 2,000 RPMs for about 5 minutes, 10 minutes or so. Get the temperature gauge up to operating temperature, make sure the thermostat's opening, all that good stuff. Then we're going to want to let it cool it down, but we go for a test drive, so I'll be going to the back and hosing all the coolant off everywhere that I can with the garden hose. And then going for a test drive. Keep an eye on the temperature gauge, and then we'll come back and let it cool off, and we can top off the radiator as needed, and the overflow, as we saw previously, as needed to the full cold level. And that would complete your thermostat replacement on your GMC Envoy, probably a Chevy Trailblazer or Chevy Blazer, Oldsmobile Bravada. Most vehicles with a 4.2 liter engine. This is 2006 and older, which is maybe a little bit different than the 2005 and previous. Good luck to you on your thermostat replacement.